Pregnant at 13 with England's future king, when you think of Henry VIII, what springs to mind? A rotund, red-faced man with a penchant for the finer things in life. Big houses, big food, big wives. But most of all, a big ego. The king had 6 wives, and 2 of them he dispatched rather unceremoniously. But he was also a very young king. In fact, when he came to power in 1509, he was only 17 years old. Imagine being 17 and having ultimate power over an entire country. It would probably go to your head. Now imagine being pregnant at 13, which is how old Catherine of Aragon was when she arrived in England. And then picture that same Catherine giving birth to Henry's heir while he is still in his teens. Well, that's exactly what happened. So let's explore how Catherine got pregnant with Henry's baby, despite his supposed impotence, and how their love story really started. Our story begins in Spain, where Catherine was born in 1485, the daughter of Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. At the age of 13, Catherine was sent to live with her aunt, Joanna, Queen of England, who was married to Henry's father, King Henry VII. While Catherine was living with her aunt, she caught the eye of Henry, the Prince of Wales, and future Henry VIII. After Henry's father died, Catherine became Queen of England by marriage to Henry, making her the first Spanish princess to become Queen Consort of England. However, Catherine wasn't exactly happy in her new role. See, right before Catherine arrived in England, Henry's counselors had made him promise that he would unmarry anyone other than his sister until he had produced a legitimate heir. And because Catherine was only 13, Henry had no intention of consummating their marriage. In fact, he basically treated Catherine like a daughter, at least at first. But it wasn't long before Henry changed his tune. It seems that while Henry didn't want children, he did want a wife. As the couple began their intimate evenings together, Catherine protested, but the young king was persistent. In fact, he tried so hard to consummate their marriage that he injured himself. According to one story, while attempting to enter the queen's chamber, Henry broke his torch and pricked himself with a burning ember. Perhaps not the best way to put some light in your love life. Whatever the reason, the bed was soon set aflame. Not a good omen, if you ask me. Later, after failing to consummate the marriage, Henry blamed Catherine, claiming that she wasn't a virgin. He even went as far as to say that he hadn't slept with her at all. Obviously, this wasn't true. Catherine was a virgin when she came to England, and while we don't know the exact circumstances, scholars believe that she may have been deflowered by her uncle, King Ferdinand, before arriving in England. But there's no concrete evidence. And even if Catherine wasn't a virgin, it wouldn't have been her fault. After all, she was only 13. Henry, too, was inexperienced. Like many debutantes, Catherine was presented at court in elaborate garments, including a gorgeous gown made of cloth of gold. Her jewels alone were worth about $35 million. In today's money, when Henry saw her in these finery, he was smitten. And although he may not have known how to be intimate with his wife, he knew how to woo her. Of course, the couple was also prodded along by members of the court, especially Catherine's ladies, who reportedly taunted her and asked why she was letting the handsome young king down. These taunts may have been a source of embarrassment for Catherine, considering that women in the 16th century were expected to be passive. When it came to matters of intimacy, there was also a lot of pressure from the public. You see, England and Spain were allied in their fight against France, and King Ferdinand had given his daughter to Henry to strengthen the bond between the two countries. If Henry couldn't produce an heir, it could damage the alliance. Of course, Henry was also under pressure from his counselors, who wanted him to get to work producing a legitimate heir. In January 1509, Henry's father died, and just days later, he found himself alone in bed with Catherine. No doubt, a little overwhelmed by the situation. Catherine was asleep by 10 p.m., and Henry, unable to consummate their marriage, climbed into bed with one of his attendants and fell asleep. The following day, Catherine left for her chambers, musing about how difficult it would be to have relations with a man so much older than her. Henry, meanwhile, was busy with matters of state. Then, 6 months later, Catherine missed her period. She must have felt like screaming, "Surprise, bitch." But of course, she didn't. Instead, she told her ladies in waiting that she felt unwell, likely trying to keep the pregnancy a secret. After all, once Catherine realized that she was pregnant, her ladies-in-waiting advised her to keep it secret, fearing that Henry would send her back to Spain if he knew that she was carrying someone else's child. Luckily for Catherine, Henry was eager to produce an heir, and when she revealed that she was pregnant, he was over the moon. In fact, he was so thrilled that he announced the pregnancy from the balcony of Hampton Court Palace, and people celebrated by releasing doves into the air. Catherine, meanwhile, continued to hide the truth about the child's paternity. As her belly grew, she concealed it with long robes and loose clothing. Even when the birth of the child was imminent, she avoided telling Henry the truth. When it came time to give birth, Catherine gave birth to a baby boy in January 1510. She named him John, after her father. But Henry was convinced that the child was his. In fact, he was so convinced that he bestowed upon the child the title of Prince of Wales, and made plans for a christening that would rival the opulence of the famous Field of Cloth of Gold, a lavish four-day, long festival held in 1510 to celebrate the renewal of an alliance between England and France. It was attended by 6,000 nobles and cost about $6 million in today's money. But little John never made it to the christening. He died just 5 days after he was born, likely of the hereditary disease that plagued both of his parents. This meant that Catherine was once again pregnant with Henry's child. This time around, Henry was anxious to consummate the marriage and produce an heir. In fact, he hired a team of doctors to give him treatments to help him perform better in bed. But when Catherine miscarried in 1511, she blamed Henry's impotence and told her ladies-in-waiting that she didn't want to sleep with the king again. Naturally, she didn't realize that the child she had lost was also Henry's. Little did Catherine know that she was about to have another run-in with the king's roving member, but this time it would result in a very real baby. Later, in 1511, Henry and Catherine were summoned to meet the Pope and discuss their upcoming new. But while traveling to the Pope's residence, Henry got cold feet. Well, actually, he got hot pants. See, Henry decided that he didn't want to marry Catherine after all, and he ran away from her, literally. In fact, he fled to Italy in disguise, leaving Catherine behind in France. Catherine returned to England shortly thereafter, but it seemed that her relationship with Henry was broken beyond repair. Then, in 1513, a miracle occurred. Catherine discovered that she was pregnant again. This time, she hid the pregnancy for as long as possible, but eventually, her belly made it obvious that she was expecting. Still, she managed to conceal the pregnancy from Henry until the baby was born. On New Year's Day 1516, Catherine gave birth to a son, Henry, who would one day become King Henry VIII. Finally, the truth came out. Catherine confessed to her ladies-in-waiting that she had conceived while the real Henry was running away from her. But it was too late. Henry, the new King of England, had no intention of legitimizing the child born out of wedlock. What's more, the Field of Cloth of Gold was fast approaching, and Catherine knew that if Henry saw her and the child at the festival, he would realize that the baby was his. So Catherine kept her son hidden until after the Field of Cloth of Gold. Then she brought him to Henry, hoping that the king would take one look at the child and do the right thing. But Henry was having none of it. He refused to accept the child as his heir, even though the two Henrys looked remarkably alike. In fact, Henry VIII supposedly declared that if the elder Henry wasn't his father, then he wasn't his father. Maybe he should have added, and that's a hill I'm willing to die on. Instead, Henry raised his illegitimate half-brother as a commoner and sent him off to live with Catherine in relative obscurity. Although Catherine had won the Battle of the Bulge, the war was far from over. She spent the next 24 years fighting for her son's place in the line of succession. Meanwhile, Henry married 6 times and sired multiple illegitimate children. But history shows us that it was Catherine's son who would one day become Henry VIII. Catherine's efforts finally paid off in 1533 when the Act of Succession was passed, and Henry VIII was officially declared next in line to the throne. Catherine spent her remaining days running the household of Henry VIII. A far cry from the life she envisioned for herself all those years ago, when she was presented at court in fine clothes and jewelry. But it was a good life nonetheless. Now check out Bloody Mary, a true story. Or click this other video instead.